Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yudches, Daf 18 of Masechta Rosh Hashanah. Friends, we got more agadatas. It's, I guess, kind of fun. More stuff about like tshuva, if you can kind of get tshuva after the verdict. So we're going to kind of continue with that. And other things. Stay tuned. Friends, we're on, I think, the second line of Daf Yudches. V'gzardin diyochid tanoihi. So friends, we had left it yesterday that there's an afkamina between an individual and a community when it comes to being able to tear up your to being able to like do tshuva and tear up your verdict. So we had said that when it comes to an individual, it's not so doable. That once there's a verdict and it's been sealed, you're kind of stuck with it. Whereas when it comes to a community, so even once there's like a negative verdict, they can pray and do tshuva, and it can get undone. So, now we're saying, but lemaise, when it comes to an individual, that is actually also a machlokas tanoim about maybe even by an individual after the verdict has been sealed, you would still be able to tear up the verdict. The Tanya is in a brayso. Meir Omer would say, Shnayim she'alu lemito. If you have two people who fall ill, v'chol yon shave, with the same illness, v'chein shnayim she'alu legardom, or two people that go before a tribunal, lidon, to be judged, v'dinon shave, and it's the same offense, and yet zayarad v'zelo yarad, one fellow was, came down from the bed, i.e., he got healed. One of them did not. Zenitzel v'zelonitzel. One of them was saved from the tribunal that was judging him, and the other one was not. Just a second. Okay, I'm back, but I forgot what I've already done or not. So, mipnei ma zayard v'zel lo yard. So, how come this fellow merited to be healed and this one did not? Zenitzel v'zelonitzel. And how come this other fellow merited to be saved from the tribunal and the other one didn't? Ze'espal v'neno v'ze'espal v'loneno. The answer is, well, because the fellow who was healed or who was saved prayed and was answered, whereas the fellow who was not healed or the fellow who did not succeed by the tribunal, which is pretty bad because we're talking about a capital offense here, so the maise, it's pretty shver. How come? So he prayed but was not answered. How come one of these fellows was answered whereas the other fellow was not? So the fellow who prayed a complete prayer, he had kavana. That's good to know. So he had kavana, so he was answered. Whereas the fellow who was not healed or the fellow who was not saved from the tribunal, while he kind of said the words, I guess he didn't have kavana. So, okay, that's good to know that it's important to have kavana. All right. Rabbi Lazar Amar says, Rabbi Lazar, kan kodem gzardin, kan lacher gzardin. So Rabbi Lazar now, weighs in on the gzardin machlokas, and he says, well, the fellow who got answered and who got saved is because he was praying before his verdict was sealed, whereas the fellow who was not, kind of didn't get healed or didn't get saved in the tribunal, so his verdict was already sealed at the time of praying. So we see that by an individual, according to Rabbi Lazar, there is a difference between prior to the verdict and post-verdict. Prior to the verdict, it can be, you can still kind of get saved. Once the verdict is in, you're kind of stuck with it. Rabbi Yitzchak Omar, but Rabbi Yitzchak says, as we saw the other day, Yofet Tzaika le'odom, that crying out is beneficial for a fellow, bein kodem gzardin, bein acher gzardin, whether prior to the verdict, whether post-verdict. Says Rabbi Yitzchak, you can always cry out to the Eibishter, and he'll always help you out. V'gzardin de tzibor mimikra. Now, we had said yesterday, Lamaise, that when it comes to a congregation, to a tzibor, so their verdict can be torn up, even post-verdict and post-sealing. Was it libech or libecha? I forgot already. Libech. So one pasuk says like launder from your heart, launder the evil from your heart, like scrub the evil away from your heart. And the other pasuk says, that even if you wash your clothing real good and add lots of detergent. I'll tell you something. I did laundry this morning, and I shtickle chiddush, laundry is something that gets a shtickle neglected. Now, maybe it's not such a big chiddush. So, but whatever. It's not a big chiddush. It's not a big chiddush. Unrelated. I thought I was out of detergent, but thank God I wasn't. Let's go weiter. Nichtam avonech lefanai. Now, the pasuk says, don't worry about the laundry stuff. Sorry, there was no need to go there. Okay. The pasuk says that even if you do laundry on yourself, still your sin has stained you. Yikes! So you see, one pasuk is saying just scrub out your heart of all evil, but the other one says scrub all you want, it's still going to be stained. So implying that you can't just tear up the thing after the verdict; it's always going to be there. So my love, kan kodem g'zardin, kan lach g'zardin. So we want to say that the way to reconcile these two psukim, as I just mentioned, is that, you can scrub your heart, you can scrub the evil from your heart before the verdict. But post-verdict, even if you scrub as much as you want, it's still gonna be what? It's still gonna leave a stain. Which, by the way, maybe I'll just crowdsource this here on Babylon Talmud. Anybody know how to get olive oil out of... but still, if you know how to get olive oil out of shorts, that would be helpful. Let's go weiter. Let's move on. Okay, what do you want me to tell you? Alright, so the ETV... the Maisa would be helpful. Okay, l'achad g'zardin, lo. The Gemara says, no, this has nothing to do with verdicts or whatever. You could say that both psukim, the scrub pasuk and the even if you scrub pasuk are both after the verdict. V'lo kasha, we can reconcile it. Kam b'gzardin sheyesh imo shvua. It depends if the verdict comes together with a swear. As you can imagine, if there's a verdict and it comes together with a swear that this verdict will be implemented, that's going to be hard to scrub clean. Kan b'gzardin she'eni moshva, where if it's just a simple verdict, but there's no swear associated with it, along with it, so then maybe you could scrub it away. Keduv Shmuel bar Ami, Amar Shmuel bar Ami, v'amila Amar Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar B'Yonasan. Minayin b'gzardin she'yesh imo shvua she'enu nikra. How do you know that if there's a verdict that has with it a swear that it will never be torn up? Shenemar, as the pasuk says, v'lochin ishbaiti l'beis Eli, that the Eibishter says that he swears about the house of Eli, that Eli was the Kohen Gadol in Shiloh, and his children unfortunately were nudniks, and they got in big trouble. And the Eibishter says, I swear, in Miskaper Avon, Beis Eli b'zevach u'mincha, that the sin of the house of Eli will not be, sort of removed or fixed or atoned with sacrifices and stuff. Omer Rabba, says Rabba, b'zevach u'mincha enu miskaper. Now Rabba says, wait a second. Yes, it's true that the sin of the house of Eli may not be able to be atoned for with sacrifices, but aval miskaper b'Torah. Wow, friends, you hear this? That even if you can't bring sacrifices, the study of Torah will be able to atone for those sins. Abai says that sacrifices won't work, but Torah plus doing good deeds will be able to help for the people, descendants of Eli. Rabba ve'Abaye midveis Eli ka'asu. That Rabba and Abaye both came from the house of Eli. Now, does that imply that they were Kohanim? It's not necessarily absolute, because it could be that their mothers came from Eli, but I think the assumption is, though, that both Rabba and Abaye were Taka Kohanim, but I can't say that for sure. Rabba the Osad Batorah Chaya Arbin Shnin. Rabba, who studied Torah, obviously, who's Rosh Hashiva and Pumbedisa, he lived until the age of 40. Friends, very interesting B'kiyas. Rabba lived till the age of 40. Abai dosak bator v'gmilas chasodim chayeshisin shnin. Now Abai also came from the house of Eli. Now, but even so, even though he came from the house of Eli, and there was like this fine of death for all eternity for their descendants, nonetheless, Abai, through the study of Torah and the acts of kindness, he was able to live for 60 years. So Rabbah came from the house of Eli, and he studied Torah alone. He lived 40 years, and Abai added on to that good deeds, and he lived for 60 years. Tana Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, Mishpacha Achas Soisa b'Yerushalayim. There was a certain family in Jerusalem. Shehayu Meiseh Meiseh B'nei Yurches Shana. They would die at the young age of 18. Ba'ovodios of Yochanan ben Zakkai. They came to Yochanan ben Zakkai, who, by the way, was a Kohen. Lav Dafka from the house of Eli, but he was a Kohen. So these people, they came to Yochanan ben Zakkai. They said, look, we're all dying at the age of 18. Amiloim. So Yochanan ben Zakkai said to them, Shema mishpachas Eli atem. Maybe you are from the household of Eli, that it says about the household of Eli and their descendants, that everybody in your household is going to die young. Go and study Torah, and you will live. They went and they studied Torah, and they lived. And they called them the family of Rabbi Yochanan, sort of as a nod to Rabbi Yochanan, who really saved them. Wow! Friends, you see the power of studying Torah? It's gewaldig. Omer of Shmuel bar Inyo mishmei derav minayin l'gzar din shel tzibur she'enu nechtom. How do we know that the verdict of a congregation is not sealed? Enu nechtom. What do you mean the verdict of a congregation is not sealed? V'oksiv nichtom avonech lefonai. But the pasuk says that, as we saw the pasuk earlier, that your sin is stained in front of me. If it's stained and so permanent, it sounds like it was taka sealed. That even though the sin of the congregation is sealed, it can still be torn up. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Ka'Hashem Elokeinu b'chol koreinu elov. That, right, the pasuk says, a mamish, a beautiful pasuk. I think it's the beginning of Parshas Eschanan, maybe. It says, right, that who is a nation that has a God that is so close to them, Kashem Elokeinu, like Hashem our God, B'chol Koreinu Elav, that whenever we call out to Him, we can always call out to Him and tear up whatever verdicts there might be. V'yoksiv dir shoshem b'yimatzo, or fact the Gemara, but the pasuk says in the Novi that we read at Mincha on fast days, it says, beseech God when He's found, i.e., He's not always found. Right? On the one hand, we have a pasuk that says, whenever we cry out to the Eibishter, He's available. Yeah, we have another pasuk that says you should beseech God when He's found, when He's available. He's not always available. So it depends. An individual, you have to find the Eibishter when He's available. But a congregation can always cry out as a congregation to the Eibishter. So now we said that an individual can cry out to the Eibishter, can beseech the Eibishter when the Eibishter is available. When is the Eibishter available? Rabbi bar Avua, Elu Asar Yom Shebin Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippurim, says Rabbi bar Avua, the Rebbe of Rav Nachman. I feel like we always see Rabbi bar Avua in the context of Rav Nachman. Here we see Rabbi bar Avua on his own. He says Elu Asar Yom Shebin Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippurim. In the Aseres he made tshuva, the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That's when the Eibishter is available, and even an individual can cry out to the Eibishter. Although interesting though, that's interesting. Well, alright. Meaning during those days you can call out to the Eibishter, but that's dafka before the Gzar Din, right? So maybe the assumption here is that this is taka before the Gzar Din. You could taka cry out, but according to Rabbi Yitzchak, maybe he says maybe you can cry out whenever, I guess. Interesting. Alright. Sounds very nice. Vayika Aseres Hayomim, Vayigof Hashem is novel. So it says in the Novi, in Shmuel Aleph, that the whole thing with novel, that David HaMelech sent people to get some food, and Novel wouldn't give them. So after 10 days, the Eibishter, he smote Novel. How come 10 days? Because at least Novel gave them one meal. Right? David HaMelech sent 10 messengers. Novel at least gave them one meal. So because he gave them meaning 1 meal to each of the 10. So he gave him 10 meals, so he got spared for 10 days. Rav Nachman Amar Rabba bar Avua elu Yud Yavim shebein Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippurim says Rav Nachman's name Rabba bar Avua that these 10 days were actually the Asaros who made tshuva, that the Eibishter was waiting to see if Naval would do tshuva, and Itaka didn't, and when he didn't do tshuva, he got smitten. Rosh Hashanah Kol B'ay Olam over in the fun of Kivnei Morin. The Mishnah had said that in Rosh Hashanah, everybody in the world passes before the Eibishter like Bnei Morin. My Kivnei Morin. What are Bnei Morin? Hacha Targimo Kivnei Amarna. So here in Bavel, so they translate Bnei Morin as sheep, like sheep. That when you're doing Meiser Behema, so you pass the sheep one at a time, and every 10 become Meiser Behema here also. On Rosh Hashanah, everybody passes before the Eibishter one at a time and gets judged. Rish Lakish Amar says Rish Lakish Kimailos Beis Maron, like this place that's called Beis Maron, that was like a very high, kind of thin, path that with like cliffs on either side, and you can only walk one at a time. Holy shnikes! That sounds like a little scary. Hope your legs don't get too wobbly on that path. Alright. Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel says, Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Ki chayalo shel Beis David, like the soldiers of Beis David, that they would go to battle, in single file. Amar Rabbi Bar Chanan, Rabbi Yochanan, v'chulin iskarin b'skira achas, and all of them are sort of glanced upon at the same time. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak afar anami tanina, and says Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak that we also learn this in the Mishnah, Yotzer Yachad Libam Hamevin Kol Ma'aseim, that the Eibishter creates everybody together and looks into their actions. My Ka'amar, what does the pasuk mean? If it means Tibaranu l'chulu l'chuli alma miyachid libaru ka'adadeh, if you're going to say what it means is that the Eibishter creates everybody as one, i.e. everybody thinks in the same exact way. That's not true. Not everybody thinks the same way. People have different opinions. That's what makes human beings so beautiful. That there's lots of us. We all have different opinions. Rather, this is what it means. Hayotzer roeh yachad libam umeven al kol ma'aseim, that the Eibishter sees all of their hearts together and understands their actions. And this is like on Rosh Hashanah, that everybody passes before the Eibishter one at a time, and the Eibishter kind of sees all of them and understands their ways and figures out what to do with them. Friends, we get to a new Mishnah now. Al shisha chodashim hashluchin yotzin, that on 6 months the messengers go out, because of course, friends, the way that they would understand when the new month begins is that witnesses would come to Beis Din in Yerushalayim. They would testify, we saw that the new moon has been revealed. That the moon, right, at the beginning of the month, the moon, it's like a 30-day cycle, the 29.5-day cycle. That the moon, you could start seeing the moon, and it's like almost like, it looks kind of like a moon shape, like a moon shape, like the moon, like, you know what I mean? The moon, kind of like it looks. Yeah, I can't describe what the moon looks like without saying it looks like the moon. So I'm just going to have to assume that you know what the moon looks like, okay? But not when it's a full circle and not when it's a half circle, like when it's almost like a banana. Okay, I think you guys get the point. So it starts out kind of looking like the moon at the beginning of the month, and then it kind of fills in until it's full at the 15th of the month, and then it kind of like, kind of moons away again, and then it disappears, and then when you see it again, so then you testify in Jerusalem, we saw the moon. And then if your testimony is accepted, so then that is when the new month begins. And then they would send out messengers to all of the Yidden wherever they were, and telling them when the first day of the month was, so that, so for example, let's say Nisan. If you know when the first day of Nisan is, so Memele, 2 weeks later is going to be the first day of Pesach. If you don't know when the first day of Nisan is, because of course, theoretically, Adar can be 29 days or 30 days, depending on when the moon appears. So therefore, so it depends, so depending on when the first day of Nisan is, it could theoretically be like the 30th day, so to speak, of Adar, or it could be the 31st day of Adar, so, right, like whatever, from the beginning of Adar. So you have to know, like, when the first day of Nisan is in order to know when the 15th day of Nisan is, to know when Pesach is. So basically it says, Al Shisha Chodashim Hashluchin Yotzin Al Nisan. Yotzin. So on 6 months of the year, so messengers go out all over the place in order to tell people when Rosh Chodesh is, so that they could say thank you very much, and then they know from that day, 2 weeks later is going to be Pesach in Nisan, for example. So Al Nisan Mipnei Pesach, so they send out the messengers in Nisan so that the people can know when Pesach is. Al Ov Mipnei Tainis, on the first of Av, they send out the messengers so that the people know when Tisha B'Av is. Al Elul Mipnei Rosh Hashanah, on Elul, at the first of Elul, they send out the messengers so that people know when Rosh Hashanah is. The assumption is it's going to be on day 30 from the first of Elul. Al Tishrei Mipnei Takonos HaMoados, the messengers go out at the beginning of Tishrei so that people know, like when Yom Kippur and Sukkot are. Al Kislev Mipnei Chanukah, and the messengers go out in the month of Kislev so that people will know when Chanukah is, the 25th of Kislev. Ve'al Adar Mipnei Purim, and also the messengers go out in Adar so that people will know when Purim is, of course, the 14th or 15th day of Adar, respectively, depending if you are in a walled city. And when the Beis HaMikdash was, existing, standing, Af al Iyar Mipnei Pesach Ka'in, they would also go out at the beginning of Iyar, so that people would know when Pesach Sheni is. In fact, the Gemara asks, V'leifku nami atamus v'teves. In fact, the Gemara, what about Tammuz? What about Teves? Right? Of course, in Tammuz, there's a Shavasar b'Tammuz, there's a fast day. Teves, there's a Sar b'Teves, there's a fast day. So if the messengers have to go out at the beginning of Av, so that the people know when Tisha B'Av is, so the messengers should also go out at the beginning of Tammuz, also at the beginning of Teves, so you know when Shavasar b'Tammuz is, so you know when Sar b'Teves is. The Amar of Chana bar Bizna, Amar b'Shimon Chasida. Because Rav Chana bar Bizna says in the name of Shimon Chasida, Ma'idechsiv. We have a pasuk in Zechariah that says, Ko Amar Hashem Tzvakos, that the Eibishter says, Tzom HaRevi'i, the fast of the 4th, V'tzom HaChamishin, the fast of the 5th, and we're going to explain what these are, V'tzom HaShvi, the fast of the 7th, V'tzom HaSiri, and the fast of the 10th, Yeh Leveis Yehuda L'Sasun L'Simcha, that they will be for the house of Judah for rejoicing. Karlu Tzom V'karlu Sasun V'Simcha. So on the one hand, we call them Tzom, right? Tzom HaRevi'i, Tzom HaChamishi, Tzom HaShvi, right? We call them fast days, but we also say that they're going to be rejoicing. Bezman she'esh shalom, yiyu l'sasun l'simcha, when there is peace. So then, right, when there's a Beis HaMikdash, they will be rejoicing. Or when kilo the Ovdei Kochavim are not overpowering the Yidden, Ein Shalom Tzom. And if it's not a time of peace, so then they will be fast days. So what do we see? So we see Lemaise that there are these other fast days. So if there are these other fast days, so then shouldn't you have to go out, and the messengers should go out for these fast days as well? So Rav Papa says, Hachi Ka'amar. This is what the pasuk is saying. This is what it means. So as long as there is peace, so then these will be days of rejoicing. Yesh gezeres malchus tzom. Now, if there is harsh decrees by the authorities, so then there will be fast days. Ein gezeres hamalchus ve'ein shalom. Now, what if there are no harsh decrees from the authorities, but at the same time there also isn't peace? So ratzu misanin, ratzu ein misanin. Well, in that case, if they want, they fast. If you want, don't fast. So we see, according to our Papa, that these fast days aren't necessarily always fast days, because we see that in a time where it's not quite peace, but not quite terrible, so ratzu misanin, ratzu ein misanin. If they want to fast, they fast. If they don't want to fast, they don't fast. So because it's like, somewhat, there are at least situations where it's optional, so we're not gonna have the messengers go out for these fasts that are essentially optional. So if it's an optional fast, so then these messengers aren't going to go out and tell people in Rosh Chodesh just that they could plan their optional fast. So it doesn't work like that. If that's the case, Tisha B'Av Nami. So if that's the case, so then the messengers also should not go out before Tisha B'Av, right? Tisha B'Av seems to be just like every other fast day, right? that Tisha B'Av seems to be like every other fast day, right? It's listed together with all the other fasts. And it sounds like in a time where there's not quite peace, but not quite terrible stuff, it's Ratzu Masan and Ratzu Masan. If you want, you can fast. If you want, you don't fast. So then why does the Mishnah say that the messengers go out at the beginning of so that people know when Tisha B'Av is? So Amar Rav Papa, so it says Rav Papa, Shiny Tisha B'Av of the Huchbulu Botzaris. Says Rav Papa that actually Tisha B'Av is an exception because there were lots of bad things that happened on Tisha B'Av. De Amar Mar, because we said B'Tisha B'Av Charav Abayis Barishona Uvashnia. Wow, that on Tisha B'Av the Bayis Rishon, the first temple, and the second temple were destroyed. V'Nukuda Beisar, and the city of Beitar was captured. V'Nechu Sha'ir, and Jerusalem was plowed over. So because Tisha B'Av was a particularly terrible day, so that is why that we're always going to fast on Tisha B'Av, and therefore the messengers go out. Will always go out in order to update the people about Rosh Chodesh Av so that they know when Tisha B'Av is. Tanya, we talk a little in a brisa. Omer Reb Shimon, says Reb Shimon, Arba Dvar Mahai Rabbi Akiva Dorish Va'ani in Dorish Kamoso. So Reb Shimon says that there are 4 things that his Rabbi Rabbi Akiva expounded, and says Reb Shimon that he doesn't necessarily expound them the same way. Now we're not going to go through all 4 of these things right now. We're going to go through one of them, which is this pasuk that we just expounded earlier. So Marvi'i, what is this 4th fast day, right? I told you we were going to explain what they are in a minute. So, right, we saw the pasuk at the top of the Amud that says, Ka'amar Hashem Tzvakos, I'm reading the pasuk that so says God, Tzom Arvi, V'tzom Achmishi, V'tzom Ashvi, V'tzom Asiri. We said the fast of the 4th, 5th, 7th, and 10th, right, are going to ultimately be days of rejoicing. So, Tzom Arvi, Ze Tes B'Tammuz. Interesting. So it says, Rabbi Akiva, that the 4th fast is the fast of the 9th of Tammuz. Okay, Shebo Huvki'ah Ha'ir, because on that day the city of Jerusalem was breached. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, B'chodesh Arvi, in the 4th month, B'Tishul Chodesh, on the 9th of the month, V'echaz HaKarav Ba'ir, the famine became very great in the city. V'lohaya lechem la'am ha'aretz, and there was no bread for the people living there. V'tiboka Ha'ir, and the city was breached. V'mai kari le'revi'i, revi'i lechodashim. And why did they call this fast the fast of the 4th? Because it's in the 4th month, right? Nisan is the 1st month, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz is the 4th month. So it says Rabbi Akiva that on the 9th of Tammuz, the walls of Jerusalem were breached, and therefore that's the 4th month. That's why it's called Tzom Harvi'i, and that is why we fast. Which is taka very interesting, because I think we assume that on Shivasar B'Tammuz the walls of Jerusalem were breached, but Rabbi Akiva is saying that it is the 9th of Tammuz. Tzom HaChamishi, what is the fast? The 5th fast is at Tisha B'Av. That is the 9th of Av. Shebo Nisav Beis Elokeinu. That's when the Beis Hamikdash, when the temple was destroyed, was burnt. V'mai kari leChamishi. Why are we calling it the 5th fast? Chamishi lechodashim, because it's the 5th month, right? Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av is the 5th month. Tzom Hashvi, the 7th month, is Gimel B'Tishrei. That is the 3rd of the month of Tishrei, the day after Rosh Hashanah. Shebo Nera Gedaliah ben Achikam. That was the day that Gedaliah ben Achikam was murdered. Friends, what's your opinion on Tzom Gedaliah? I always had a very hard time with Tzom Gedaliah because when I was younger, I used to Rosh Hashanah was very fun, and the day after Rosh Hashanah I was not ready for fasting, so it never worked out so good and whatever. Anyways, so yeah, I think they used to say about my great grandfather that I'm named after him, Lamaise. I think he would say that he wouldn't fast on Tzom Gedaliah because would Gedaliah fast for him? I don't know. Maybe. What do you want me to tell you? Alright, let's go weiter. So I think that's what they said. Why not? Alright. Would Gedaliah fast for me? Alright. Gimel b'Tishrei shebo nera Gedaliah ben Achikam. So that was the 3rd day of Tishrei that Gedaliah ben Achikam was murdered. Umihargo, who murdered him? Yishmael ben Nisanya Aragov, that Yishmael ben Nisanya killed Gedaliah ben Achikam. Lilamedcha, friends, to teach you, Sheshkula misoshan shel tzadikim kesreifas beis Elokeinu, that the death of the righteous is as severe and as significant as the Beis Hamikdash burning down. And just like we fast for the destruction of the temple, we also fast for the murder of the righteous. And how come we call that the seventh? Shvi l'chodashim, because Tishrei is the seventh month. So Ma'asiri, what is the 10th fast? Ze'asera b'teves, that is the 10th of Teves. Shebo samach melech Bavel al Yerushalayim, that is when the king of Babylon, now of course not Babylon, the king of Babylon, that was a place. That is when the king of Babylon surrounded Jerusalem. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Vayidvar Hashem Elai b'shana atshiyis b'chodesh Asiri, that the pasuk in Yechezkel says that the Eibishter came to Yechezkel in the 9th month, b'chodesh Asiri, in the 9th year, in the 10th month, be'esr l'chodesh, on the 10th of the month, leimor to say ben Adam, man, k'sav es shem hayom. So write down this day, es etzem hayom hazeh, Somach Melech Bavel Yerushalayim, that on this day the king of Babylon surrounded Jerusalem. Why is it called the 10th? Asiri lechodashim, because it is the 10th of the month. Now, as for Akiva, ve'alo hayaroi zeh lichtov rishon. Now, one second. Technically speaking, chronologically, so the city of Jerusalem was surrounded first, right? Kilu, what comes first in the pasuk? The first in the pasuk is Tzomar Revi, which is in Tammuz, which is when we said that the walls of Jerusalem were breached. Now, obviously, the walls of Jerusalem were surrounded before the walls of Jerusalem were breached. So how come the fast of Tammuz is listed first in the pasuk? If technically speaking, the fast of Teves, which is listed last in the pasuk, chronologically happened before the walls were breached. So v'lamanichtov kan lahastir chodashim kitiknon, because, says Rabbi Akiva, he explains that in this pasuk the months are simply being listed in their order, not necessarily in the order of events, but in the sort of months being in order, i.e. Tammuz, Av, Tishrei, and finally Teves. Ba'ani, and says Reb Shimon, Eini Omer Kain, I don't say like this. I don't explain the pasuk in the same way. I differ in that Elatzoma Asiri Zechamisha B'Teves, that the fast of the 10th is not the 10th of Teves, not Teves being the 10th month, but says Reb Shimon, the fast of Teves, the fast of the 10th month, is not the 10th of Teves. Rather, says Reb Shimon, it's a reference to the 5th of Teves, Shebo Bas Shmuel Legola, that on the 5th of Teves is when they found out, outside of Israel, Shehuksa Ir, that the city was destroyed, destroyed. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, Vayibishtei Esrei Shana Ba'asiri, it was in the 12th year, in the 10th month, B'chamisha Lachodesh, on the 5th of the month, so the 5th of Teves, the Galusenu, in our exile, but Elaya Polit Yerushalayim, a refugee from Jerusalem, came, Lemor, to say, Huksa Ir, that the city was smitten. V'asu Yom Shmua Kiyom Sreifa, and the day that they found out that Jerusalem was smitten, they made it basically like the same as when it was destroyed. They made it into a fast day. So says Reb Shimon that I actually understand the fast of the 10th not to be referring to Asar B'Teves when when Jerusalem was surrounded, but rather the 5th of Teves, which is when later on, actually outside of Jerusalem, they found out about it. So that actually happened last, right? Meaning first Jerusalem was destroyed, and only later on did the people find out about it. So according to Reb Shimon, chronologically, now the pasuk is sound. First, the wall was breached, and then the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and then Gedaliah ben Achikam was murdered, and then people found out about it later on. So V'nir Dvar Midvarav, and says Reb Shimon that Taka, his opinion is more sound, seems to make more sense than Rabbi Akiva, Shani Omer al Rishon Rishon al Achron Achron, because according to me, the pasuk is saying is chronological. What happened first, right? First was Tammuz, which is when the wall was breached. And the last thing in the pasuk is the 5th of Teves, which is when everybody then found out about it at the end. Obviously, the wall was breached, but what was surrounded before it was breached, but the pasuk isn't talking about that, isn't including that. V'nir in Dvarim, Dvarav, wait, where am I? Fine. V'hu Omer, whereas according to Rabbi Akiva, al Rishon Achron, he's saying that the thing that happened first, he's saying happened last, right, is last in the pasuk, i.e. the surrounding of the city, according to Rabbi Akiva, is the last thing in the pasuk, but chronologically it happened first. Val Achron Rishon, and the thing that happened after the surrounding of the walls, which is that the wall was then breached, he's saying that's the first thing in the pasuk. So it says Reb Shimon that, in that sense, my opinion makes more sense because then things are chronological. Ela shehu moneh l'seder chodashim, but rather Rabbi Akiva is listing based on the months being in order. Vani moneh l'seder poranius, where I am listing it in the order of events, in the order of the tragedies. Alright friends, I think we should take a stop here because otherwise there isn't really a good place to stop for a while. So maybe let's take a stop here. I think it's a good idea. Friends, that was Takadaf Yud Ches of Masechta Rosh Hashanah. I think it was actually a very interesting daf. We talked about right, the machlokas tanoim about actually if an individual is able to have his gzardin torn up even after it's been sealed. We saw the opinion of Rabbi Lazar who says no, an individual, once the verdict is in, it's in. Whereas Rabbi Yitzchak, we saw it a few days ago, but we saw it again on today's daf, that you can always cry out to the Eibishter, whether before the verdict or whether it is after the verdict. We also saw that sometimes when it comes to a congregation as well, there could be certain verdicts that are irreversible, and that is if it's a verdict that is along with a swear, as we saw by the house of Eli, that all of his descendants basically would die young because the Eibishter swore that they were in big trouble. But we saw the opinion of Rabbah that Torah study can fix that, and Abai says Torah study plus doing kindness fixes it even better. Rabbah and Abai both came from the house of Eli. Rabbah studied Torah and he lived to the age of 40. Abai studied Torah and did acts of kindness and he lived to the age of 60. We saw that there was that story with the family in Jerusalem that everybody would die young, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai suggested that, well, maybe they come from the house of Eli, right? They would die at the age of 18. He said, why don't you study Torah? And in fact, they studied Torah and then they lived longer lives. So that was very cool. We then got to a new Mishnah at the bottom of Yud Ches Amud Aleph, at the bottom of the first Amud, that at 6 points in the year, the messengers would go out to let the people know when Rosh Chodesh was, so that they can calculate accordingly when the different festivals would be. For example, on Pesach, on the first of Nisan because of Pesach, on the first of Av because of Tisha B'Av, and there were 6 examples like this. We then asked, wait, what about Tammuz and also Teves? Because after all, there are fast days then. Where we said, well, actually, interestingly, if they're in a situation, so those fast days, as we see from the pasuk in Zechariah, they're ultimately going to be rejoicing days. So we said when there's a Beis Hamikdash, and sort of we're not under the power of others, under the ruling of others, so then they're festivals, they're holidays. But when there are sort of harsh decrees, so then they're fast days. But when there's neither harsh decrees nor the Beis Hamikdash, so then Ratzu Misanin, Ratzu Ein Misanin, it's optional. Because it's volitional, because it's optional, we're not going to have the messengers go out for an optional fast. We then saw machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon about how to understand that pasuk about these fasts. That according to Rabbi Akiva, basically the big nafkamina is that according to Rabbi Akiva, the fast of the 10th is a reference to Asar B'Teves, when the walls of Jerusalem were breached. According to Rabbi Akiva, according to Rabbi Shimon, the fast of the 10th is a reference to the 5th of Teves, which is when in the exile they found out that that Jerusalem was destroyed. And the difference being that Rabbi Akiva explains the pasuk that all the months are going in a chronological order, and that's the most important thing. Whereas according to Rabbi Shimon, things are going in terms of order of events. That according to Rabbi Akiva, the events are out of order because Asar B'Teves is when I don't know what I just said, but according to Rabbi Akiva, Asar B'Teves according to everybody, on the 10th of Teves, the walls of Jerusalem were surrounded. But according to Rabbi Akiva, the pasuk which mentions the fast of the 10th last is a reference to Asar B'Teves, which is when the walls were surrounded. But the fact of the matter is that it happened chronologically first. So that's why Rabbi Akiva says yes, but it goes in terms of the order of the months. Whereas Rabbi Shimon says no, it actually is chronological, and just it's not talking about Asar B'Teves, it's talking about the 5th of Teves, which is when later on everybody found out about it, and that's why it's last in the pasuk. Friends, that was Daf Yud Ches, Daf Chai, Daf Life of Masechta Rosh Hashanah. So l'chaim to everybody. You should have a year full of great life, and of course Mazel Tov to our dear friend Rabbi Shmuley Perkel on the birth of his daughter Nava Tehila Perkel, and may her life be very full of life, like all of our lives, like the Daf Yud Ches of Masechta Rosh Hashanah, the Daf Chai of Masechta Rosh Hashanah. Have an awesome day. Peace out.